The room was warm, bathed in a soft glow of fairy lights that draped across the walls like golden vines. A faint smell of buttered popcorn lingered in the air, mingling with the sweet scent of candy wrappers scattered across the floor. For teenagers, Sarah, Emma, Jason, and Lily were sprawled across a giant, lumpy mattress in the middle of the room, giggling uncontrollably as they recounted inside jokes and whispered secrets. The sound of their laughter was comforting, almost hypnotic, wrapping the room in a cocoon of innocence and carefree joy. Outside, the sky was bruised with storm clouds, the distant rumble of thunder a low growl that seemed almost polite, just an ambient reminder that the world beyond their little bubble still existed. Sarah tossed a pillow at Jason, who dodged it with exaggerated theatrics. Emma rolled her eyes, laughing, while Lily clutched a blanket around her shoulders, pretending to shiver from the cold despite the warmth of the room. Their eyes sparkled with the kind of reckless joy that only a sleepover can bring. The excitement of being allowed to stay up late, to whisper, to imagine and believe in the impossible. Yet even in their laughter, there was a subtle tension, a delicate thread of unease that none of them could name. Shadows stretched longer than they should have, flickering strangely under the soft light. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to sync with their heartbeats, a rhythm just slightly off, hinting at something lurking beyond sight. The camera, or the narration, if you will, lingers on these small details. The faint creak of a floorboard as Jason shifts his weight, the flutter of the curtains even when the wind has not yet picked up, the low hum of electricity from the nearby lamp. These ordinary sounds, so easily ignored during the day, take on a sharper edge at night. The viewer is invited to lean in, to feel what the teens feel without realizing it yet. Comfort teetering on the edge of fear. As the night deepened, Emma pulled out her phone to check the time, the blue glow illuminating her wide, expectant eyes. That's when the first anomaly appeared. A text from an unknown number. At first, it seemed like a harmless prank. "Probably one of you messing around," she muttered, trying to laugh it off, but the message lingered on the screen, chilling in its simplicity. "I see you." The words hung there, glowing unnaturally in the dim room, and for the first time, the laughter faltered. Jason leaned over, curiosity mixing with the tiniest edge of alarm. "Who sent it?" he asked, voice low, hesitant. No one had an answer. Lily's fingers tightened around her blanket. Sarah tried to smile, but her lips betrayed a quiver of doubt. The room felt suddenly smaller, almost suffocating. Every shadow seemed to stretch further, the corners darker than before. Outside, a particularly sharp clap of thunder rattled the window panes, making the lights flicker. For a moment, the room was plunged into near darkness, and the teens froze, eyes darting to every shifting shadow, every creak and whisper that might be nothing, or might be something far worse. The tension builds slowly, deliberately. The ordinary objects of a sleepover, the blankets, the pillows, the candy wrappers, take on a sinister undertone. Every detail is amplified. The faint scratching of the wind against the windows, the distant drip of rain. Even the soft ticking of a clock on the wall becomes a drumbeat in the soundtrack of unease. The camera lingers on Emma's face as she hesitates to open the next message, and the audience feels her hesitation deep in their chest. A subtle, creeping dread that something unseen is watching, waiting. Even as they try to return to the comfort of games and whispers, the undercurrent of fear refuses to dissipate. The laughter is now brittle, and every glance toward the closet or window carries suspicion. The storm outside grows louder, but now it is more than just weather. It mirrors the growing anxiety within the room. And as the section closes, the final note lingers on the screen. Emma's phone buzzes again, the new message blinking like a warning. This one reads simply, "I'm already inside." The room goes quiet. A shiver runs down their spines. The cozy warmth is gone, replaced with the icy realization that the night ahead will not be ordinary. And just like that, the calm before the nightmare has ended, leaving only tension, fear, and the first hint of terror that will not let go. It began subtly, almost innocuously. Lily stirred in her sleep, a soft groan escaping her lips as she shifted beneath the heavy blankets. The room, once warm and filled with laughter, now felt unusually still. The fairy lights flickered, shadows bending and stretching unnaturally across the walls. Sarah and Emma, huddled in the corner, whispered to each other, their voices almost swallowed by the thickening silence. Jason, sitting on the edge of the mattress with his knees drawn close, felt a strange prickling sensation at the back of his neck, a sense that they were no longer alone. It was Lily who first noticed it. Her eyes, half closed and still adjusting to the darkness, darted to the closet in the corner. The door was slightly ajar, more than it had been before. A subtle shift, a movement so slight it could have been imagined, but it wasn't. The air around it felt colder, heavier, as if the shadows themselves had mass. Lily's breath hitched, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket, pulling it closer like a fragile shield. Did anyone leave the closet open?" she whispered, voice trembling. Jason shook his head, trying to steady his own heartbeat. "Probably just the wind," he said, though the reassurance sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The room's atmosphere thickened with tension. Every creak of the floorboard, every faint rustle of fabric became amplified. The shadows seemed to twist toward the closet, drawn to it like invisible threads. Sarah tried to laugh softly, attempting to mask her own unease, but her laugh came out brittle and strained. "It's just a game, right? We're all joking?" she said, though her eyes betrayed the truth. She was watching the closet, too. Then came the first unmistakable sound. A soft, deliberate whisper, so faint it could have been imagined, brushing against the edge of consciousness. Lily froze. Jason leaned closer, eyes scanning the darkness. The whisper came again, slightly louder, a single word this time. "Hello?" Time seemed to slow. The room, once safe, now felt like a trap. Every heartbeat thundered in their ears, every shallow breath a reminder of the fragility of their comfort. Jason's hand reached instinctively for the closet door, his knuckles brushing against the cool wood. He hesitated. A rational mind told him nothing could be there. Just a prank, a shadow, the imagination of tired teens. But the instinctual dread in his chest refused to be ignored. Slowly, deliberately, he opened the door. The closet yawned before him, darkness pooling inside, concealing what could have been there, or what was still there. At first, it appeared empty. Coats hung neatly, boxes stacked against the wall, shoes in their places. Relief surged briefly, only to be snatched away the instant Jason noticed a damp, smudged handprint on the inside of the closet door, fresh, glistening under the faint glow of the fairy lights. The teens froze. The whisper returned, this time from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "I see you," it breathed, chilling the air, curling around their spines. Lily shrieked softly, burying her face in the blankets, while Sarah grabbed Jason's arm, her grip frantic. Emma's phone slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor, the light from its screen casting frantic shadows across the walls. The room was alive with tension. Shadows moved independently, no longer tied to the flickering lights above. The closet door creaked slowly, almost imperceptibly, though no one was touching it. A cold gust of air seemed to brush their faces, carrying with it the faint smell of damp earth, like a grave freshly dug. Every instinct screamed at them to flee, but the door blocked the only clear path, and the walls seemed to close in with every heartbeat. Jason, voice barely above a whisper, tried to reason. "It's just someone messing with us. Maybe a prank." But his words lacked conviction. The creak of the closet door grew louder, almost rhythmic, matching the pounding of their hearts. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching along the floor, crawling up the walls like liquid darkness. Lily peeked through the blankets. A figure, or at least the suggestion of one, stood in the far corner of the closet. It was vague, shifting, but it was there. Not fully formed, yet unmistakably present. Her breath caught in her throat. Every rational thought fled as primal fear took hold. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished. Silence returned, but it was not the same. The room felt hollow, stripped of safety. Every whisper of the wind, every flicker of light, Every creak of the house became amplified. The teens huddled together, too terrified to move, each second stretching into eternity. The climax arrived in the sudden, sharp realization. The handprint was gone. The closet looked normal, as if nothing had ever been there. But the fear, the dread, had not dissipated. The shadows remained darker than they should have been, the air heavier. The storm outside rumbled once more, as if affirming the truth they dared not speak. They had been watched. Jason finally whispered, voice shaky, We need to check the rest of the house." But no one moved. The thought alone was paralyzing. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape the house entirely, yet their feet refused to obey. The night stretched on, long and unyielding, and the closet waited silently, patiently, a dark promise of what could come next. Even as the camera or the narration pulls back, showing the 4 teens frozen in terror, the whisper returns one final time, barely audible but impossibly clear. "I'm still here." The room goes cold. Every hair stands on end. The cozy warmth of the sleepover, the safety of friendship and laughter, evaporates entirely, leaving only fear. And as the scene fades to black, the audience is left gripping their seats, heartbeats echoing the suspense that refuses to release its grip. The calm is over. The nightmare has begun. The room had grown impossibly quiet. The storm outside softened to a gentle drizzle, but inside, the air felt thick and heavy, almost tangible with lingering fear. The 4 teens huddled together in the center of the room, blankets wrapped tightly around themselves like fragile shields against the invisible presence that had invaded their sleepover. The laughter and playful energy from earlier had vanished entirely, replaced with a tense, nervous silence. Every movement, every small sound, seemed amplified, reverberating through the room in a way that made their skin crawl. Lily's hands trembled as she clutched her blanket, her knuckles white. Maybe it was just someone outside," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Emma, sitting cross-legged nearby, hugged her knees to her chest, eyes wide and scanning the shadows that seemed to creep along the walls. Jason sat quietly, trying to steady his breathing, replaying the events in his mind. Every creak of the floorboard or rustle from the closet made his heart skip a beat. Sarah rubbed her arms, attempting to calm herself, but each time she glanced toward the corner where the closet door had been ajar, a shiver ran down her spine. The teens tried to talk, to rationalize, but words fell short. "It's nothing," Jason muttered, forcing a shaky smile. "Probably just our imagination." Yet even as he spoke, the tremor in his voice betrayed the truth. They all knew the feeling of being watched, the weight of eyes lingering just beyond sight. The room, once a safe haven, now felt like a stage for something unseen, something patient, observing their every move. The blankets muffled their whispered conversations, but still, the tension in their body language was impossible to hide. Lily kept glancing at the closet, then at the windows, as if expecting the darkness itself to reach out and pull her in. Emma's phone lay forgotten on the floor, the screen dark now, yet the memory of the text, "I'm still here," hung over them like a second shadow. Sarah tried to laugh quietly, but it came out strained, brittle, only reminding them how alone they truly were in that moment, despite their proximity to each other. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally. Each tick of the clock on the wall sounded louder, more pronounced, like a drumbeat counting down to something inevitable. The rain tapped softly against the window, almost rhythmically, creating a soundtrack of unease. Shadows danced faintly in the corners of the room, shifting with every flicker of light, teasing the mind into seeing shapes where none existed, or perhaps shapes that should not be. The teens attempted to share stories, anything to distract themselves from the oppressive atmosphere. Sarah recounted a funny memory from earlier in the day, trying to coax a laugh from her friends. Jason attempted to make a joke, though it fell flat, dissolving quickly into nervous glances toward the closet. Lily stayed quiet, lost in her thoughts, and Emma stared at the floor, tracing patterns in the carpet with her finger, her mind replaying the whisper she'd heard. It was a brief reprieve, this small attempt at normalcy, but it did little to erase the unease settling into their bones. Suddenly, the subtle shift that made everyone tense occurred. The window rattled violently, the curtains fluttering as if something outside had brushed against them. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something else. Something metallic, almost like rust. Every teen froze simultaneously, hearts pounding, muscles locked in a fight-or-flight reaction. The room, so recently a place of comfort, felt hostile, alive in ways they did not understand. Emma's phone buzzed again, piercing the thick tension. She picked it up slowly, as if even the act of reaching for it might provoke the unknown. Her eyes widened as she read the new message. "I'm still here." The words glowed on the screen, unnaturally bright in the dim room, and the room seemed to contract around them. Fear surged, unrelenting, gripping each teen in icy fingers. There was no laughter now, no jokes, no playful teasing. Only the suffocating weight of being watched, the realization that whatever had entered their night, whatever had breached the thin veil of safety, was not gone. They huddled together, whispering barely audible reassurances, their voices trembling with each word. No one dared to move toward the closet, and no one wanted to look outside, even as the rain slowed to a faint drizzle. The tension in the room was a living thing, a palpable presence that coiled around their hearts and minds, refusing to be ignored. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light served as a reminder that the calm they had taken for granted was nothing but a fragile illusion. And as the camera or the narration lingers on the four teens, frozen and silent, the audience is left with a heavy, lingering dread. The sense of unease hangs in the air like smoke, thick and inescapable. They are safe, technically, yet fundamentally aware that the night is far from over, that the terror has only paused, gathering strength for what comes next. The calm of reflection has ended, and the anxiety, silent, patient, and terrifying, remains. Jason shifted uncomfortably, the memory clawing at him like a phantom hand. His voice was low, almost trembling, as he recounted the sleepover at his cousin's house from years ago, a story he had never told anyone in full. The night had been ordinary at first. Laughter, snacks, games, the careless joy of being allowed to stay up past bedtime. But as darkness settled over the house, a subtle, unsettling presence began to make itself known. The basement door, tucked at the end of a narrow hallway, loomed like a silent sentinel. Jason described the first sound, faint footsteps echoing in the basement below. At first, they seemed random, easily explained away. Maybe it was the old house settling, he thought. But the rhythm was too deliberate, too measured. The soft thump of soles against the wooden floor sent a shiver up his spine. Each step seemed to reverberate through the walls, traveling upward to where he and his friends huddled. The air grew colder, heavier, the faint musty smell of the basement wafting upward as if to warn them. His friends had initially laughed at him, thinking it a prank, an elaborate joke he was playing to scare them. But as the footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, and impossible to place, skepticism gave way to unease. Sarah leaned in, eyes wide, listening as Jason mimed the sound with his fingers on the floor. The memory was vivid, cinematic in detail. The dim yellow glow of the hallway lights, the faint smell of damp wood, the dust motes drifting lazily through the stale air. The basement itself was a narrow, claustrophobic space, the kind that seemed designed to make the imagination run wild. Jason's voice dropped further. "We thought it was someone in the house, but the front door was locked. The windows, all locked too. No one could have been there. And yet—" He paused, swallowing hard, eyes distant as if the memory itself was a living, breathing entity. The footsteps became louder, more insistent. The teens in the room leaned closer to him, heartbeats echoing in unison with his own. The tension built incrementally, a slow burn designed to tighten the chest. Every sound, every creak, every flutter of shadow becomes an extension of their fear. Jason described how he had dared to peek into the basement. Just a sliver, enough to see the outline of old furniture and the faint gleam of metal tools on the workbench. Nothing moved. Nothing should have been there. But the footsteps continued, moving in patterns that no human could make alone. The suspense was unbearable, the kind that made stomachs twist and palms sweat. Then came the horrifying discovery. The basement contained a hidden door, cleverly concealed behind a stack of old boxes. Jason described the moment he noticed it, how a faint outline of hinges shimmered under the dim light. His hands shook as he opened it slowly, revealing a narrow crawlspace that descended further into darkness. And that was when the photographs appeared. Yellowed, torn images of children he did not recognize. Their eyes cruelly scratched out, faces frozen in expressions of terror. The room he was describing, the basement, felt alive with dread. Jason's friends had initially thought it was staged, a prank designed to terrify him. But the reality, he insisted, was far worse. The shadows seemed to move independently, curling and twisting around the furniture. The air itself was charged, thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly coppery, like dried blood. Each footstep grew heavier, echoing not just through the basement, but through the marrow of anyone listening to the story. Lily leaned forward, clutching the edge of the blanket fort. "What did you do?" she whispered, voice barely audible, as though speaking louder might summon the unseen presence. Jason's answer was slow, deliberate, the words heavy with dread. "We didn't move. We couldn't. We just watched and listened. And eventually, it stopped." But the story didn't end there. The real horror, Jason explained, was in the silence that followed. The sudden absence of footsteps was no relief. It was worse. It was the anticipation, the knowledge that the unseen entity hadn't gone, only paused. He described how every small sound, the creak of the old wooden floorboards, the rustle of his own clothing, even his own heartbeat, was amplified 100-fold, each one a reminder that the presence remained, watching, waiting. Jason's hands trembled as he recalled the final, unforgettable moment. The photograph he had accidentally brushed with his finger, smudging the image of one of the children. For a heartbeat, he swore he saw the eyes, black voids now glaring up at him, as if alive and filled with awareness. The photograph fell from the crawlspace, landing on the basement floor with a hollow thump, and the footsteps, soft now, almost imperceptible, resumed. They circled the basement once, twice, then faded away completely. Even now, years later, Jason could feel the tension return as he retold the story. The room of friends listened in horrified silence, the cinematic imagery of the basement playing vividly in their minds. The dim light, the shadows stretching unnaturally, the smell of damp earth, and the photographs with eyes scratched out. A cruel invitation to fear. Every element was meticulously preserved in his memory, refusing to be forgotten, refusing to let the audience feel safe. As the story drew to a close, Jason's voice softened, almost reverential. "We never went back to that basement," he admitted. "Not fully, not alone, and I don't know if it was ever really gone." The pause that followed was thick with tension, unspoken dread filling the space between words. The storm outside seemed to echo his sentiment, distant thunder punctuating the fear that lingered. The section closes with a lingering shot, or the narration's cinematic pull, on the four teens in the present, huddled together, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The memory of the basement, the footsteps, the hidden photographs, and the unshakable feeling of being watched leaves them, and the audience, gripped with fear. There is no resolution, only the knowledge that some horrors are patient, waiting for another moment, another night, another vulnerable group to encounter them. And just as the audience begins to breathe, a soft thump from the bedroom closet echoes faintly in the room, reminding everyone that the line between memory and present terror is thinner than they ever imagined. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the room like a chill wind. She leaned closer to the others, eyes wide, tracing the outline of shadows that danced along the walls from the flickering candle she had lit on the floor. The story she told was one she had never shared in full, not because it was impossible to believe, but because the memory itself clawed at her mind with relentless insistence. A sleepover, much like the one they were having tonight, had gone horribly wrong years ago, leaving an imprint of fear that never truly faded. It had started innocently. Friends gathered in a small bedroom, talking, laughing, and passing around snacks. But as the night deepened, Emma began to notice something peculiar. Her friends seemed different. Their laughter was slightly delayed, their smiles just a little too rigid, their eyes glancing around the room as if anticipating someone or something. The air felt heavier, colder, and a faint hum seemed to vibrate through the walls, subtle but persistent. Emma tried to shake it off as imagination, but the unease clung to her like damp clothing, impossible to remove. The first disappearance happened quietly. One of her friends, Nicole, had gone to the bathroom and never returned. Emma's call went unanswered. Footsteps echoed somewhere in the house, but not familiar ones. Panic rose slowly, then surged. She searched the room, the hallways, the kitchen, everywhere but found nothing. Her friends' faces were blank, distant, eerily calm despite the situation. The normal warmth of friendship had dissolved into a chilling isolation. Emma recounted how she had tried to rationalize it. Maybe Nicole had left for a phone call. Maybe she had stepped outside. But then the whispered messages started, small, almost inaudible notes passed under doors, slipped between folded blankets, written in shaky handwriting that mimicked voices they had all heard. Each note contained a single word or phrase: go, run, don't look back. She described how the handwriting was both familiar and foreign, like an echo of someone she trusted, twisted into something sinister. The room in her memory had become a labyrinth of fear. Emma remembered crouching in corners, listening intently for any sound. Footsteps, whispers, the faintest brushing against walls. Everything heightened the terror. Every time she thought she had found another friend, the person would vanish again, leaving only silence and those cryptic notes behind. The sensory details made the memory vivid. The faint smell of rain seeping through slightly open windows, the rustle of bedsheets, the candlelight casting long, unsteady shadows that seemed to move independently. She described the psychological toll with raw honesty. Each disappearance gnawed at her mind, forcing her to question reality itself. Her pulse raced constantly. Her vision narrowed into tunnel focus on the corners of the room. Every heartbeat became a drum of impending doom. The isolation, compounded by the eerie stillness of her friend's behavior, created a suffocating atmosphere, where the line between reality and imagination blurred. She admitted that the terror was almost paralyzing. Moving could provoke whatever was orchestrating this nightmare, but staying still felt equally dangerous. Emma recounted a moment when she thought she had a chance to escape. She crept toward the front door, heart hammering in her chest, muscles taut with tension. But the hallway stretched endlessly, shadows pooling with unnatural density, and whispers seemed to follow her every step, calling her name in a tone that was both familiar and alien. Turning back, she found the room empty, her friends nowhere to be found, and the door locked itself silently behind her, a cruel mockery of freedom. The horror was not in gore or sudden shock, but in the creeping, methodical dread. Emma's story emphasized the psychological torment. The anticipation, the paranoia, the dissonance between expected safety and the unnerving reality. The sounds of the house, floorboards, whispers, distant dripping water, became amplified into a symphony of terror. Every sense was assaulted, each subtle movement in the room a potential harbinger of something far worse. Finally, the story reached its chilling apex. Emma found Nicole sitting in the farthest corner of the room, head bowed, as if in a trance. When she approached, the friend did not acknowledge her. Instead, a note appeared on the floor at her feet. "It knows you too." That simple phrase encapsulated the unrelenting fear. The entity or force was intelligent, aware, and patient, biding its time. The memory of that night had never left her, a constant shadow hovering at the edge of her mind. In the present, Emma paused, letting the weight of her story settle over her friends. The room of teens listening to her leaned in, breaths shallow, muscles tense, every instinct heightened. The candle flickered, shadows stretched unnaturally, and even the gentle rain tapping against the window sounded like a distant warning. The audience, like the teens in the room, is left suspended in that delicate balance of fear and disbelief. As the section closes, the atmosphere is charged with unresolved tension. The story of the silent sleepover leaves both characters and audience on edge, hearts racing, minds searching for safety that does not exist. The unease lingers, a quiet but insistent promise that the terror is far from over. The camera, or the narration, pulls back, leaving the audience with one final, unnerving thought. The past is never truly gone, and some nightmares are patient enough to repeat themselves. The tension in the room began to loosen, albeit only slightly. The storm outside had softened to a gentle drizzle, pattering softly against the window panes, creating a calming rhythm that contrasted sharply with the adrenaline still pulsing through the teens' veins. The four friends huddled together, blankets wrapped snugly around their shoulders, seeking comfort not only in warmth but in each other's presence. After the harrowing tales and creeping shadows of the night, they needed a reprieve, a momentary return to the innocence that had begun the evening. Jason broke the silence first, his voice attempting levity, though the quiver betrayed the lingering fear. "Remember that time we tried to make a haunted tent in the backyard, and Lily screamed at a squirrel?" A nervous laugh escaped Lily, fragile yet genuine, as she nodded. Emma rolled her eyes, but even she couldn't suppress the small smile tugging at her lips. The stories flowed, each one a vivid snapshot of simpler times. Campfire mishaps, burnt marshmallows, the awkward panic of telling ghost stories under the stars, and the silly dares that ended in harmless chaos. The room seemed to breathe easier. Shadows still lingered in corners, but they felt less menacing now, almost like loyal guardians of memory rather than silent predators. The fairy lights flickered softly, mirroring the gentle glow of a distant campfire, and the faint scent of popcorn and candy wrapped around them like a security blanket. The laughter, though cautious, became a temporary balm, knitting together frayed nerves with familiar bonds of friendship. Sarah shared a story of a camping trip where they had all gotten lost in the woods, only to stumble upon a field of fireflies that lit the night like stars fallen to earth. Her words were animated, painting a cinematic picture of soft light against dark foliage, the rustle of leaves, and the quiet, magical hum of nature. Jason added the memory of their attempt at a midnight snack raid, tripping over each other and spilling juice on the rug, and Lily mimicked their chaotic clumsiness, sending all of them into another round of nervous laughter. Even Emma's phone, previously a harbinger of dread, rested quietly on the floor, its screen dark, a silent witness to their fleeting comfort. Despite the temporary relief, an undercurrent of unease remained. Every laugh was punctuated by a glance toward the closet, every movement shadowed by the knowledge that the night had already shown them that safety was fragile. The contrast between joy and fear heightened the emotional stakes, making the reprieve both sweet and bittersweet. The camera, or the narration, lingers on these delicate moments, capturing the subtle trembling of hands, the tight clinging of blankets, and the half-smiles that mask lingering dread. The pacing slowed intentionally, allowing the audience a moment to breathe, to absorb the relief before the next wave of horror arrives. The rain outside continued its soft, rhythmic dance, a lullaby that contrasts sharply with the chaotic memories of the night. The teens' bond was palpable, their shared stories a bridge back to comfort, yet each one was hyper-aware of the shadows that had not fully lifted. Every small sound, the creak of a floorboard, the flutter of curtains, the hum of the lights, reminded them that the unseen presence might be biding its time, waiting for the lull in attention to strike again. Jason, sensing the fragility of the moment, leaned back against the pillows and said quietly, "It's nice, just to remember the good stuff." The others nodded, the words a gentle anchor against the storm of fear and suspense. The camera panned slowly over their faces, capturing a rare, fleeting vulnerability. The way their eyes softened, the small relief in their posture, the collective exhale that signals a temporary reprieve from the terror of earlier. Yet, as the scene draws to a close, subtle cues remind the audience that calm is deceptive. A window rattled slightly in the soft breeze, A shadow stretched in a way that didn't match the light, and the faintest whisper, almost imperceptible, seemed to brush the edges of consciousness. The storm may have quieted, the laughter may have returned, but the night was far from over. The contrast between relief and dread ensures that the audience remains on edge, knowing that the next story will plunge them back into fear, deeper and more visceral than before. The section ends with a lingering cinematic shot. The four teens wrapped in blankets, faces illuminated by the soft glow of fairy lights, sharing laughter and whispered memories. The audience senses the fragile nature of their comfort and anticipates the coming terror, perfectly setting the stage for the next chapter of the night's unsettling events. Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she leaned forward, eyes reflecting the dim glow of the fairy lights scattered across the room. She began recounting a story that had haunted her for years, a tale of a sleepover with an uninvited presence, a ghost that roamed the hallway outside her bedroom. The night had begun like any other. Friends gathered for snacks and games, pillows and blankets strewn carelessly across the floor, laughter echoing through the house. But as the evening deepened and shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, something shifted, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. It was the faint sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving with a rhythm that did not belong to any of her friends. At first, Sarah thought it was her imagination, the creaks and groans of an old house settling under its own weight. But the steps became more pronounced, closer, circling the hallway outside her door with unnerving precision. The air grew colder, a damp chill seeping through the cracks of the door, brushing against her skin with icy fingers. She pulled the blankets tighter around her shoulders, a futile attempt at protection, and glanced nervously at the others. Her friends tried to dismiss it, offering reassurances that it was probably the wind or the pipes. But the sound persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing in the narrow hallway. Sarah described how she could see shadows flickering through the crack under the door, though no one should have been there. The fear was immediate, primal, a shiver running down her spine that made her knees weak. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, yet she was frozen, caught between terror and the need to protect herself and her friends. The atmosphere intensified as the footsteps grew heavier, echoing in a pattern that seemed almost sentient, as if the entity were testing their reactions, measuring their fear. Shadows stretched along the hallway walls, bending unnaturally, creating shapes that seemed almost human. The faint smell of mildew and something metallic lingered in the air, subtle but unmistakable, searing into her memory. Sarah could feel her pulse racing, every nerve on high alert, every sound amplified into a cacophony of dread. Her description became cinematic in its detail. The soft, flickering glow of a nightlight in the hallway, casting long, wavering shadows, the distant hum of electricity from a lamp, the creak of floorboards as if someone or something were pacing just out of sight. The suspense built slowly, deliberately, like the tightening of a spring ready to snap. Every small movement, every whisper of the air, made her heart leap, each moment prolonging the audience's anticipation. Then came the first appearance. A fleeting shape at the end of the hallway. A translucent figure with indistinct features, moving with unnatural fluidity. Sarah recounted the moment she blinked, and the figure seemed closer, as if it had glided through the hallway rather than walked. Her friends froze, eyes wide, breath caught in throats, mirroring the terror that gripped her. The entity seemed aware of their fear, watching and waiting for even the slightest sign of weakness. The story's tension escalated further. Doors along the hallway slammed shut, one after another in rapid succession, though the wind had died down hours before. The sound reverberated through the house, shaking the walls and rattling the hearts of everyone present. Sarah could feel the panic rising, the kind that makes limbs heavy and thoughts sluggish, where rationality fights against instinct but fails to win. She described the sensation vividly. The hairs standing on end, the cold sweat on her back, the trembling hands clutching the blanket for reassurance that was impossible to find. Mirrors along the hallway became instruments of terror. Sarah described how the ghost's reflection would sometimes appear for a fraction of a second, only to vanish the moment she tried to focus on it. Her breathing became shallow, uneven, and every creak, every whisper, every shadow was magnified by her own heightened senses. The entity seemed to toy with them, appearing and disappearing at will, its presence a constant, oppressive weight pressing down on their chests. The climax of the story arrived in a moment of revelation. A photograph fell from the wall, an old family portrait she had never paid attention to before. The figure in the hallway appeared reflected in the glass, eyes hollow and staring directly at her, face twisted in a silent scream. Sarah described how the world seemed to pause. The air thickened, her friend's eyes locked on the image, frozen in disbelief and horror. Every sound, the wind, the distant rain, even their own heartbeats, was swallowed by the suffocating presence that filled the hallway. The resolution, however, was far from comforting. The figure vanished once more, leaving nothing behind but an icy draft and the lingering sensation of being watched. Sarah emphasized the psychological toll. The creeping dread, the terror of anticipation, and the awareness that some entities do not seek closure. They merely exist, patient and persistent, waiting for the next moment to strike. The audience is left grasping at the edges of fear, the story refusing to provide relief, instead leaving a residue of unease that clings to the skin and mind. As the section closed, the camera or the narration pulled back to show the four teens in the present, huddled together, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The story had transported them into that dim hallway, into the chilling presence of a ghost whose motives were unknowable. The storm outside continued its faint, rhythmic drizzle, a soft lull that did nothing to dissipate the terror. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch further. Every small noise heightened their senses, and every heartbeat reminded them that the night's horrors were far from over. The final note lingered, a faint creak from the bedroom closet, a subtle but undeniable sound, echoing in the background. The presence, like the ghost in Sarah's story, was patient, watching, waiting for the moment to reassert itself. The relief they had felt earlier was temporary, a mere pause in a night filled with shadows, whispers, and entities that refused to let go. The audience is left on edge, the tension a palpable thread connecting the stories, guiding them deeper into the realm of fear that the next tale promises to deliver. Lily's hands trembled as she began to recount the most terrifying sleepover of her life, a night trapped inside a room that refused to release them. The story unfolded in meticulous detail, every sensory element designed to immerse the listener fully. The night had begun like any other. Friends gathered for snacks, movies, and whispered secrets. The room littered with candy wrappers, blankets, and the soft glow of string lights casting warm patterns across the walls. The air was thick with excitement, a mixture of comfort and anticipation for a night that promised laughter, but delivered something far darker. The first warning sign had been subtle. The door, usually easy to open, resisted her push with an unnatural stiffness. At first, she had laughed it off, assuming her hand had caught the lock awkwardly, or that the hinges had swelled slightly with the evening's humidity. But when the door failed to budge entirely, even with force, a chill ran down her spine. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly, the air thickening as if the walls themselves had drawn closer, tightening around them. The friends tried to leave through the windows, but each one was inexplicably jammed, as though welded shut. Panic began to creep in, slow and insidious, infecting every thought with fear. Lily described the sensation vividly. The way her pulse pounded, the way her palms grew clammy despite the blankets, the rapid shallow breaths that betrayed the terror clawing at her chest. Her friends, once boisterous and joking, now mirrored her fear, huddling together in a circle on the floor, eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement in the room. The first sound came from the closet, a soft, deliberate thud, almost rhythmic, echoing in the small room. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. The others followed suit, each straining to hear the next movement, the next signal of an unseen presence. The sound repeated, louder this time, a sequence of knocks that felt deliberate, intelligent. Sarah whispered, voice trembling, "Who's there?" The room responded only with silence, broken occasionally by a faint scratching sound from the walls, like fingernails tracing an unseen pattern across the plaster. The tension escalated steadily, cinematic in its precision. Every ordinary object became an instrument of fear. The blankets that were supposed to comfort now seemed heavy, oppressive. The candy wrappers rustled in the slightest breeze that shouldn't exist. The string lights flickered in patterns that mimicked the heartbeat of something unseen. Lily described how shadows stretched unnaturally, bending around corners and pooling near the closet, as if drawn by an intelligence that delighted in torment. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the faint drip of condensation from the ceiling, the soft hum of the electrical outlet, was amplified, each one a signal of the entity's awareness of their presence. The climax arrived when a single, unmistakable movement drew their collective gaze to the closet door. It swung open slowly, silently, revealing darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The shadows inside appeared to shift independently, crawling along the edges of the doorframe like living ink. A cold draft rushed from the closet, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of blood mixed with damp earth, a sensory assault that sent shivers racing down their spines. Lily's friends screamed softly, a chorus of fear that had no outlet, echoing in the confined space of the locked room. Lily described the entity itself, not fully visible but undeniably present. A shape coalesced in the darkness, vague yet terrifyingly intentional, moving with fluid, unnatural motions. The entity's awareness of them was palpable. It didn't attack directly but toyed with their perception, amplifying every heartbeat, every tremor, every whispered thought of escape. The room became a theater of psychological horror, where anticipation and dread replaced overt violence, making the terror intimate, inescapable, and profoundly personal. As the hours stretched, the friends tried to maintain a semblance of calm, whispering reassurances and clinging to each other. But the locked room had stripped them of agency, each attempt to open the door or escape through the window thwarted by invisible force. The psychological weight of being trapped, combined with the entity's deliberate manipulations, made every second unbearable. Lily's narrative emphasized this slow burn of terror, the way fear infiltrated the mind and body, making rational thought nearly impossible. Finally, in the story's chilling resolution, the room returned to stillness. The closet door slowly closed, the air warmed slightly, and the entity seemed to retreat into the shadows. But the sense of being watched remained, an invisible hand pressing on their shoulders, a constant reminder of the night's horrors. Lily concluded with a haunting detail. The lock on the door had returned to normal the next morning, as if nothing had occurred. But the memory, the fear, and the knowledge that some entities do not leave remained etched in her mind forever. The cinematic imagery lingered for the audience. The flickering lights, the oppressive shadows, the faint metallic smell in the air, the cold chill that refused to leave. The tension between fear and temporary relief kept listeners on edge, heartbeats synced with the story's pacing, anticipating the next revelation. The room, once a safe haven, had become a theater for terror, and the audience felt every heartbeat, every shiver, every moment of paralyzing dread. The section closed with a subtle yet potent cliffhanger. A soft creak from the closet, just as it had that night, echoing faintly in the present. The story reminded both characters and audience that the terror of the night was patient, lurking in shadows, and the calm they felt was fragile, a temporary reprieve before the next wave of horror arrived. Jason leaned back slightly, the flickering glow of the fairy lights reflecting off his eyes as he began recounting a story that had left him shaken for years. A sleepover dominated not by sound or movement, but by the oppressive presence of a shadow that watched without ever revealing itself. The memory was vivid, cinematic in every detail. A suburban house, ordinary in daylight, transformed at night into a stage for a subtle, insidious horror. The night had begun with laughter, snacks, and the usual games. But as the evening deepened and shadows lengthened, an invisible force began to make itself known. It started with a feeling rather than a sight. A prickling sensation at the back of his neck, an awareness that someone or something was observing, analyzing, and waiting. Jason described the sensory elements meticulously. The room's temperature dropping slightly, the faint smell of damp would creeping through the air, and a subtle hum, barely audible, that seemed to vibrate in the walls. The contrast between the warmth of friendship and the coldness of the unseen presence created an emotional tension that gripped both the characters and the audience. The first clear sign of the shadow came when objects began to shift subtly. A pillow slid across the floor, a chair nudged slightly, small movements easily explained by the imagination, or so it seemed. Yet, the timing and precision were too deliberate. Jason's friends laughed nervously at first, attributing it to pranks or coincidence, but unease quickly replaced levity as the sensation of being watched intensified. Every glance toward a corner of the room, every instinctive turn of the head, revealed nothing, but the awareness of the shadow remained, a constant psychological weight pressing on their minds. Jason described how the shadow never fully revealed itself. It was a presence at the edge of perception, a dark mass that stretched and bent along walls, floorboards, and ceilings without explanation. It moved fluidly, silently, and with intent. The entity seemed to respond to their fear, growing heavier, darker, more oppressive whenever someone attempted to confront it. The emotional impact was immense. A feeling of being hunted without the comfort of knowing what you are running from, where the line between imagination and reality had blurred into indistinguishability. The cinematic tension escalated as Jason recounted the entity's interactions. Lights flickered sporadically, casting erratic shadows that seemed to twist and warp unnaturally. The air grew thick and difficult to breathe, the faint metallic scent of iron intermingling with the stale odor of carpet and blankets. Each subtle sound, the creak of floorboards, the soft shuffle of a blanket, a whisper of movement, was magnified, forcing the teens to hold their breaths, hearts pounding in anticipation of a reveal that never fully came. Lily, listening intently, shivered as Jason's description painted the scene. The shadow would appear near the closet, then vanish into the corner. It would linger near the window, then recede into the darkness beneath the bed. The entity's patience was terrifying, feeding on their fear rather than confronting them directly. Jason emphasized how the emotional impact of anticipation, of knowing something is watching but never fully seeing it, was far more harrowing than any sudden shock. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the shadow held them in place with invisible tendrils of terror. The tension climaxed when a small object, a stuffed animal, was lifted from the floor without visible cause, hovering briefly before dropping again. The teens froze, breath shallow, muscles taut. The room seemed to hold its own breath, suspended in that terrifying balance between observation and action. Jason's voice dropped, almost reverent, as he described the collective panic, the paralyzing fear that gripped them all. No one spoke, no one moved. They were trapped not physically, but psychologically, ensnared by the shadow's silent dominance. The resolution, if it could be called that, was subtle yet devastating. As the night waned, the shadow receded slightly, leaving behind only the lingering sense of its presence, a cold whisper in the back of the mind that would not disappear. Jason emphasized the psychological aftermath. Sleep was shallow and restless for days. Shadows seemed to cling to corners, and every creak or flicker in the darkness reignited the terror. The entity had not left. It had only withdrawn, biding its time, patient and persistent, a reminder that some horrors do not seek closure. They merely exist, eternal and unrelenting. The narrative's cinematic quality was heightened by Jason's attention to sensory detail. The contrast between the warmth of shared blankets and the chill that crept along the floor, the flickering light casting unnatural shapes on the walls, the almost tangible weight of a presence unseen, yet felt with every fiber of the body. The pacing alternated between moments of intense dread and slower, reflective passages, allowing the audience to experience both the psychological torment and the relief of temporary reprieve, enhancing engagement and emotional resonance. As the section drew to a close, the camera, or narration, pulled back to show the teens in the present, huddled together, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The shadow story had transported them fully into that night, into the pervasive and patient terror of an unseen observer. The storm outside continued its soft, rhythmic drizzle, creating a deceptive sense of calm, while the audience remained suspended in the lingering fear. Every shadow in the room, every faint creak, every distant sound was imbued with potential menace, a reminder that the night's horrors were far from over. The section ended on a subtle, chilling cliffhanger. The faintest movement in the corner of the room, a shadow that flickered just beyond the reach of light, suggesting that the silent watcher might still be present, patient, and eternally observant. The tension was unbroken, a carefully crafted lead-in to the next story, ensuring that the audience remained deeply engaged, hearts racing, minds alert, and ears tuned to every whispered detail of the unfolding nightmare. Emma's voice grew quiet, almost reverent, as she began recounting a sleepover that had left an indelible mark on her memory. A night dominated by the sinister presence lurking in a mirror. The story began like any ordinary gathering. Friends sprawled across the floor, pillows and blankets forming a chaotic fort, laughter echoing off the walls, and the comforting glow of fairy lights providing a warm, soft illumination. Yet beneath the surface of normalcy, Emma could feel an unease creeping into the edges of her consciousness. Subtle at first, but growing heavier with every passing minute. The first sign appeared innocuously. The reflection in the large bedroom mirror seemed slightly delayed, as if the image lagged behind their movements. At first, Emma dismissed it, attributing it to poor lighting or a trick of the eye. But then the delays grew more pronounced. Actions. Simple gestures like raising a hand, turning the head, or adjusting a blanket were mirrored incorrectly. The reflection sometimes lingered, staring too long, or performed subtle, unnatural variations of their movements. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the mirror was not merely reflecting reality. It was observing, responding, perhaps even communicating. Emma described the cinematic tension with meticulous detail. The mirror itself dominated the room, tall and imposing, framed in dark wood that seemed to absorb light. Shadows pooled unnaturally around its edges, stretching and bending with a life of their own. The soft hum of electricity from the fairy lights created flickers that danced across the glass, amplifying the distorted reflections. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of blankets, every whispered laugh now felt like it was magnified, magnifying the fear rather than dispelling it. The first explicit interaction occurred when Emma's reflection did not mimic her movement at all. She raised her hand slowly, and the figure in the mirror did not respond. Instead, it lifted its head, tilting it at an impossible angle, and stared directly at her with hollow, dark eyes. The camera, or the narrative lens, lingers on this moment. The sharp contrast between the warmth of the room and the chilling cold emanating from the mirror. The juxtaposition of the friends' laughter fading into uneasy silence. The psychological terror was immediate, gripping her chest, making each heartbeat thunder in her ears. Lily, listening intently, could almost feel the temperature drop as Emma described the mirror's influence. Every friend's reflection seemed subtly altered, expressions twisted just enough to create unease. The cinematic imagery extended beyond sight. The faint metallic scent of the room intensified, the air felt heavier, thick with anticipation, and the soft, irregular tapping of the rain against the window mirrored the irregularity of the reflections. Emma emphasized how every sensory detail contributed to the mounting fear, creating an immersive experience that left both the characters and the audience on edge. The tension escalated as the mirror began to act independently. Shadows within it stretched toward them, curling and coiling in ways that defied physical laws. A whisper, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the glass, repeating their names in voices that were almost familiar but distorted, unnatural. The friends attempted to step back, but the room seemed to expand and contract around them, the mirror's presence dominating every corner, every shadow, every breath. Emma's description highlighted the slow-burn terror, emphasizing anticipation over sudden shock, making the psychological impact far more profound. The climax of the story came when Emma's reflection moved entirely independently. The figure in the glass smiled, slowly, deliberately. A smile that was not hers, a smile filled with malice and intelligence. The friends screamed softly, their voices mingling with the echoing whispers from the mirror, creating a layered soundscape of terror. Emma described the moment vividly. The frost forming on the edges of the glass, the shadows dancing like living tendrils, and the cold so intense that it seemed to seep into their bones. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the mirror's presence held them in place, paralyzing them with fear. The story's resolution was hauntingly subtle. The mirror returned to normal by morning, reflecting their movements accurately once again, as though nothing had happened. But the psychological imprint remained. Every glance toward any reflective surface thereafter was colored by suspicion, dread, and the memory of hollow eyes and unnatural movements. Emma emphasized that the true horror was not the immediate threat, but the lingering, unshakable feeling of being observed by something intelligent, patient, and malevolent. The narrative maintained cinematic quality throughout. The interplay of light and shadow, the contrast between ordinary room elements and the supernatural distortion, and the heightened sensory descriptions of cold, smell, and sound. Pacing alternated between tense anticipation and reflective observation, keeping the audience engaged while also allowing space for their own imaginations to heighten the horror. The section's emotional resonance centered on fear, unease, and helplessness, drawing listeners into the story with immersive detail and psychological depth. As the section concluded, the camera, or narrative lens, pulled back to show the friends huddled together in the present, shivering, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The mirror story had transported them into a realm where the familiar became threatening, where reflections could deceive and terror could linger unseen. The storm outside had quieted, but the shadows in the room seemed alive, stretching toward corners, crawling along walls, and whispering promises of things yet unseen. The final note lingered with a subtle but chilling hint. A faint glimmer in the mirror, a reflection that seemed just a fraction too late, suggesting that the entity might still be present, patient, and observing. The section left both the characters and the audience suspended in dread, the anticipation of what comes next perfectly set for the following story in the night's sequence of horrors. Sarah's hands tightened around her knees as she began recounting the final story of the night. A sleepover that had started with excitement and ended in unrelenting terror. The memory was etched into her mind, each detail sharp, cinematic, and impossible to forget. The night had begun innocuously. Friends gathered for movies, popcorn, and whispered secrets. The room bathed in the soft glow of fairy lights. But beneath the laughter and warmth, something sinister had been creeping in, invisible yet palpably present, waiting for its moment to strike. The first hint of the impending horror came when one of the friends mentioned a game they had played earlier. A game involving telling stories about ghosts or unexplained events. Laughter had followed, but a subtle tension had lingered, unnoticed at first. Then came the first unusual event. The front door, supposedly locked, was found slightly ajar despite no one having touched it. A chill swept through the room, sudden and biting, causing goosebumps to rise on their arms. The atmosphere shifted immediately, the warmth of friendship replaced by a creeping unease. Sarah described how the friends initially tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a draft had pushed the door open, or maybe one of them had forgotten to lock it. But rationality quickly gave way to fear when other signs appeared. Soft footsteps in the hallway, objects slightly moved from their original positions, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow seemed amplified, magnifying the terror. The tension was cinematic in its layering. The ordinary transformed into the ominous, each sensory detail meticulously highlighted to draw the audience fully into the experience. The first major fright occurred when a small chair slid across the floor without explanation, narrowly missing Emma. The friends screamed, hearts racing, voices trembling as panic took hold. Sarah emphasized the psychological torment. The fear of the unknown, the helplessness of being trapped in a familiar space that suddenly felt alien, and the constant anticipation of the next, inevitable scare. The camera, or the narrative lens, lingered on these details. The trembling hands, the wide eyes, the subtle shivers that betrayed the body's instinctive response to fear. As the night progressed, the horror intensified. Shadows in corners seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving independently of the light sources. The friends whispered frantically to each other, trying to maintain composure, but every movement, every sound heightened the suspense. Sarah described how she could feel a presence lingering just beyond sight, patient and deliberate, observing their reactions. The cinematic imagery was vivid. Flickering fairy lights casting long, bending shadows, the soft rustle of blankets sounding like footsteps, the faint metallic scent of something unseen permeating the air. The climax of the story arrived when a final, unexpected guest appeared, though no one had invited them and no one could see them fully. A cold draft swept the room, extinguishing a few of the candles, and in the dim remaining light, a shadowy figure emerged at the edge of the group. Its form was vague, almost blending with the darkness, but its presence was undeniable. Sarah described the immediate panic. The friends huddled together, breaths short and shallow, every instinct screaming to flee, yet unable to move as the room seemed to contract around them. The entity, the last guest, did not speak or move overtly. Instead, it exuded a sense of watching, judging, and waiting, intensifying the psychological horror. Every heartbeat, every tremor, every whispered word among the friends was magnified, echoing in the confined space. Sarah emphasized the fear of anticipation, the terror of not knowing what would happen next, and the realization that this presence was not bound by conventional rules. The audience feels it too, a lingering dread that heightens the suspense and emotional engagement. Sarah recounted the desperate attempts to regain control, checking locks, trying to light more candles, calling out names, but the last guest remained, patient and unyielding. The cinematic tension peaked as she described the subtle changes in the room. Shadows that didn't match the objects casting them, reflections in mirrors that seemed slightly delayed, and the feeling of eyes upon them from places unseen. Every sensory detail, the faint smell of smoke, the chill crawling along the floorboards, the soft rustle of fabric, served to deepen the unease, creating an immersive horror experience. Finally, in the story's resolution, the presence seemed to retreat as dawn approached. The friends, exhausted and terrified, remained huddled together, unable to speak, the room silent except for the faint morning light filtering through the curtains. Sarah emphasized that the entity's departure was not a relief, but a subtle reminder that it remained aware, patient, and perhaps waiting for another opportunity. The psychological imprint of fear lingered, an invisible weight that would haunt them long after the night ended. The narrative maintained cinematic quality throughout. The interplay of light and shadow, the contrast between the warmth of friendship and the malevolence of the unseen, and the heightened sensory experiences of cold, smell, and sound. Pacing alternated between high-intensity moments of terror and slower, reflective passages, allowing the audience to absorb the horror while also experiencing fleeting relief. The emotional impact centered on fear, dread, and helplessness, drawing listeners fully into the story with immersive depth and tension. As the section concluded, the camera, or narrative perspective, pulled back to show the friends in the present, huddled together, blankets wrapped tightly around their shoulders, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The story of the last guest had transported them fully into that terrifying night, leaving them and the audience with lingering unease. The storm outside had nearly faded, but the shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer, every subtle sound amplified by the mind's heightened awareness. The final, haunting note lingered, a faint movement in the corner, barely perceptible, suggesting that the last guest had not truly left, that some presences are patient and eternal, waiting for the next night, the next sleepover, the next vulnerable gathering. The tension remained unbroken, ensuring that the audience's hearts remained racing and minds alert, fully immersed in the night's series of horrors. The room fell silent after Sarah's story, the weight of the night pressing on every corner. The storm outside had faded into a soft drizzle, but the tension lingered like a living thing, clinging to the walls, the shadows, and the hearts of the friends. Emma, Jason, Lily, and Sarah huddled closer together, blankets wrapped tightly around their shoulders, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The flickering fairy lights cast dancing shadows that seemed to move with a consciousness of their own, echoing the terror of the night. This was a moment to reflect, to absorb the cumulative fear, and yet the dread refused to release its grip entirely. The closing section focused on the psychological resonance of the night's events. Each story had escalated tension, alternating between high-intensity fear and brief moments of relief, creating a cinematic rhythm that mirrored the audience's heartbeat. Now, the reflection was necessary. What did these experiences mean? The friends spoke quietly about the nature of fear itself, how anticipation often outweighed action, how the mind can become the most terrifying theater of all. The audience is invited to consider their own reactions, the subtle ways shadows, sounds, and the unknown can manipulate perception and emotion. Emma spoke first, her voice calm but heavy with lingering anxiety. She recounted how, even in ordinary rooms, ordinary nights, the mind can twist the familiar into the horrifying. Shadows stretch unnaturally, reflections lie, and silence can scream louder than any noise. The friends nodded, each recalling the feeling of being observed, trapped, or tested by unseen forces. This moment allowed the audience to breathe slightly, a brief pause to internalize the lessons of anticipation, vulnerability, and the delicate boundary between reality and imagination. Jason added his perspective, highlighting how shared experiences amplified fear. Alone, a creaking floorboard might be dismissed. Together, it became a signal, a warning amplified by the collective mind. This shared vulnerability deepened the emotional connection between the characters and between the story and the audience. Every shiver, every tense glance, every whispered, "Did you hear that?" now resonated with a broader understanding. Fear is both personal and communal, intensified by awareness of those who share the space. Lily reflected on the moments of relief interspersed throughout the night, the soft rain, the stories of campfire laughter, the fleeting comfort of blankets and friendship. These contrasting moments were vital, cinematic devices that heightened the terror of the following stories. They reminded the audience that fear is not constant. It ebbs and flows, giving space for anticipation to rebuild tension, ensuring that the climax of horror is always more impactful. Sarah concluded the reflection by emphasizing the lingering, almost unbearable awareness that some presences, whether real, imagined, or somewhere in between, do not leave easily. The night's stories were not just tales of ghosts, shadows, and malevolent entities. They were meditations on patience, observation, and the relentless persistence of fear. Even as the storm outside subsided, and the first faint light of dawn touched the windows, the emotional residue of the night remained. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every small noise in a quiet house could reignite that sense of vulnerability. The cinematic quality of this section relied on subtle sensory details. The soft patter of rain against the window became a metronome, marking both the passage of time and the lingering tension. Shadows shifted slowly as the lights flickered, creating movement where there was none, a reminder that perception can deceive. The faint scent of damp blankets and faintly burnt popcorn hung in the air, grounding the story in reality even as the mind remained suspended between fear and relief. The friends' slow breaths, the gentle shifting of their bodies, the tightening and loosening of blankets. Every small detail was amplified to immerse the audience fully. The section ended with a final, haunting note, the camera or narration. Pulled back to show the room in its entirety, friends huddled, shadows stretching along walls, light flickering softly, and the rain continuing its gentle rhythm. The stories had concluded, but the sense of unease remained, a quiet, insistent presence in the mind of the audience. It was a reminder that fear is patient, that the night does not end neatly, and that some horrors are timeless, lingering in corners, reflections, and silent hallways, waiting for the next moment to resurface.